This is going to be the second shir in our series on the psuk of Sefer Yehושע, Parak Aleph, Pasuk Yud Ches, that we're discussing right now. The Shaila, if Yehושע ben Nun had the din of a melech or not. So we spoke many different Makaimis, and we spoke many different ideas. I'm going to go over some of them, explain a little bit more, and cover some more ground also. Now we spoke that we know that the concept of being married b'malchus, we learned it out from Yehושע, like the Rambam brings in Hilchos Malachim Parak Gimel Halacha Ches, and we mentioned the Gemara Sanhedrin Daf Samach Vav that a nasi, your mitzvah al hamra osai, and Rashi says over there shekenat achayiv misal hamra osai shleilim red b'tzivuyai, l'hamra says piv, because it says that you're a mechayiv misa if you rebel against him, if you don't listen to his commandments. Shenamar b'Yehושע, like it says by Yehושע, kol isha sheyamar es picha. And we also spoke about the idea that ein shalom b'urim v'tumim elu l'melech, and we spoke about the Gemara Yuma Daf Ayin Gimel, and we said that Rashi says over there also that it's talking about Yehושע. Now, if you take a look at the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos to Yuma Parak Zayin about the who could use the Urim v'Tumim, the Rambam says, this that the halacha is that you're not allowed to ask the Urim v'Tumim unless you're the Melech or the Av Bezdin or somebody chashuv like that. L'masha Omar b'Yehושע shahaya Melech, because of what it says by Yehושע that he was the Melech. L'fnei Elazar hakayin yamad v'shalom b'mishpat Urim l'fnei Hashem. It's very clear in the Rambam that the Rambam is referring to Yehושע as a Melech because he was the one that was able to ask him the Urim v'Tumim. But if you look in Yad Ramah and Sanhedrin Daf Tezayin, he says that Yehושע wasn't a Melech, but he was b'makom Melech. So that's really what we spoke last time also, that he may have been a Nasi, even though it was pretty clear in Rashi and Sanhedrin, not like that he had a din of actual Melech. But even if he wasn't an actual Melech, he was the closest thing to be a Melech. And we also spoke the Rambam at the beginning of Hilchos Malachim, Parak Aleph Halacha Gimel, and also being able to be Moitzi L'Melchemes or Rishos. The Yerushalmi and Sanhedrin learns it out, Al Piv Yetzuv, Al Piv Yavayu. That's talking about Yehושע, so that it would have to be a Melech also. And here's one of the sugyas, one of the marmakaimis, one of the makairas, so to speak, that everybody points to also. The Mishnah in Saita, in Parak Zayin, talks about the Melech being the one to reach from the Sefer Torah by Hakel. The Tosfos Yontif writes over there that the makar is because the pasuk says, "B'vay kol Yisrael iritzas pnei Hashem alakecha b'makom asher yivchar tikras haTorah hazos." That the pasuk says when all of Klal Yisrael come to see Hashem, b'makom asher yivchar in the Beis Hamikdash, he'll read the whole Torah. And Moshe was saying to Yehושע to read, so Elamai Yehושע has to be a Melech, right? So Moshe is even greater than that. But what's interesting is that the Sefer Yereim and the Smag, Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol, bring a different makar, that the Mitzvahs Hakel is from a Melech, and not like the Tosfos Yontif. Now, if you look in the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim Parak Beis Halacha Hey, where he discusses the Hilchos Kavod HaMelech, he says like this: "V'chol ha'am ba'nei lov b'eisha yirtzeh," and the people, the nation, comes to him whenever they need. V'oimdim lefanav, and they stand in front of him. V'mushtachavim arza, and they bow on the ground. They prostrate themselves on the ground. Afilu navi oimid lefnei hamelech mishtachava arza. Even a navi who stands before a king has to bow down and prostrate himself on the ground. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, Hinei nasan hanavi vayavai lefnei hamelech veishtachu lamelech. That the navi, nasan hanavi, came to David HaMelech, and he had to bow before him. Aval kohen gadol einei ba lefnei hamelech elo im ratza. The kohen gadol doesn't appear in front of the king unless he wants. V'einei omer lefanav elo hamelech omer lefnei kohen gadol. And the V'einei omer lefanav elo hamelech, and the melech has to stand in front of the kohen gadol. Elo hamelech omer lefnei kohen gadol shenemar lefnei Elazar kohen yamod, because the pasuk says that he'll have to stand in front of Elazar HaKohen. Afal pi kein mitzvah al kohen gadol lechabed es hamelech lo'yishivay v'lamen mipanav k'sheyavay lo. Now, even though the kohen gadol is really greater than the melech, but it's still a mitzvah for the kohen gadol to show respect to the king and to give him a seat, give him a place to sit, and to give him a place to stand when he comes to greet him. V'lo yamed hamelech lefanav, and the king shouldn't stand in front of him. If the king is going to have to ask the Urim V'Tumim something, he's going to have to rely on the Kohen Gadol. So Elamai, the Kohen Gadol is greater, so he would only have to stand in front of him when he's talking directly to the Urim V'Tumim. And the Makar of this Rambam is brought in the Sifri Zuta. That's on the pasuk of Fnei Elazar Kayin Yamid. The Sifri Zuta says like this: Pasuk le'Hakadosh Baruch Hu Gedula le'Elazar. Hakadosh Baruch Hu gave a certain Gedula to Elazar. Shafilu Melech Amid Mulfanav. That even the king has to stand up in front of him. And if we're going to say that Yeshua was only a shofet, then how can we learn out from what it says by Yeshua v'lefnei Elazar Kayin Yamid that a king has to stand in front of a Kohen Gadol, even if he's not asking in the Urim V'Tumim, unless his din is said only by a shofet. But a melech mamish, maybe his kavod is greater. And why would we say that? Because if you take a look at the Rambam in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, Mitzvah Kufayin Gimel, that the chiyuv of the kavod hamelech hu mehakavod v'hagdula v'hamayla hatachlis ha'achron she'ein l'mayla mimenu. That is from the greatest levels and the epitome of respect. Hatachlis ha'achron. It's the end goal of respect, that there's nothing higher than that. So, from the fact that the Rambam says that, it's muchach that Yeshua was a melech that had all the dinah covered, because it says v'lefnei Elazar Kayin Yamid, and we're not downplaying the melech in front of the Kohen Gadol. Now, Avada, so the question is like this, and this is what we spoke from the Nitziv last time, that says he take on all the genunei hamalchus, the hainu, if he would have a horse, it would be usher to ride on his horse. So according to what we're saying now, Avada would be true. And there's many places in Chazal and in the Rishonim that, as we spoke, that Yeshua had a din of a melech. If you take a look in Bereshis Rabbah, Parsha Nun Tes Ois Vav, it says the following: Avram Rosh L'Avos. Avram was the head of the Avos. Yeshua Rosh L'Malchus. Mishevet Ephraim. Shenemar Minei Ephraim. Shosham Ba'amalek Ze Yeshua. Yeshua was the Rosh L'Malchus from Shevet Ephraim, and David is the Rosh L'Malchus from Shevet Yehuda. And like the lashon of the Rashbam that we saw in Bava Basra, that Yeshua was a Navi and Melech, just like Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, this that we're saying that, what's this medrash? Avram Rosh L'Avos, Yeshua Rosh L'Malchus. We have a medrash seemingly that says very clear that Yeshua had the din of a Melech. Now, before we get involved in the technicalities about the Malchus based David, which we'll see a big arichos about B'Shem Reb Chaim and the Briskirov, but there's also more here to understand that there's an idea here that Yeshua was the leader of Klal Yisrael. Yeshua was the Melech over Klal Yisrael, as we're seeing over here, that he was the Rosh L'Malchus Mishevet Ephraim, and probably the only one that was the Melech from Shevet Ephraim. So the Agra de Kala, the Bnei Yissaschar Sefer on Chumash and Parshas Chayesar, brings this medrash on the pasuk of Avram Zoken Baba Yaman. He said, Shloishin, this is the medrash, Shloishin Nechtarim Bezikna. 3 people get crowned with the Zikna, Ubiyamim, and with many days. Ushloshtan Hayu Rosh L'Nisayan. And 3 of them were the head of being tested. Avram, Yeshua, and David. Avram, Yeshua, and David, as we just said, Avram was Rosh L'Avos, Yeshua was Rosh L'Malchus, Mishevet Ephraim, and David is Rosh L'Malchus, Mishevet Yehuda. And he says it's difficult to understand what does it mean that they're Rosh L'Nisayim. And also we have to understand something. What does it mean that Yeshua was the Rosh L'Malchus Me'Ephraim? L'chayra Shaul was the first king, and he was from Shevet Binyamin. And all the other kings were from Shvatim, meaning, and all the other Malachim were from other Shvatim also. Like the Gemara says in Sukkah and Daf Chav Zayin, She'en L'cha Kol Shevet Shalei Hamid Melech. Now, if you take a look at the Nusach of the Gemara that we have, it says that Ein L'cha Kol Shevet Mi Yisrael Shalei Hamid Shofet. Now, what does it mean in Nisayan? See, he gives it a very interesting touch. He says, V'nira Loimar Nisayan Pirush L'Dugma, for an example. And as we know, that the reason why the Melech has to, again, back to the Melech, but the reason why the Melech has to have a Sefer Torah, as we spoke on the pasuk of L'Yomer Sefer Torah Zemipicha V'Gisa B'Yom V'Layla, the reason why the king has to have a Sefer Torah is that he should be the semel, he should be the symbol of a person that's Esek B'Torah. So that's what it means in a sign. And a sign is a much of a nes. A nes can mean a miracle, and also a nes means like a pulvis. So I say al nes. Now the reason why, now they're really the same thing, because the reason why you look up at a pole to see what's going on top of it. So that's the idea of a nes, a miracle. Meaning you look up and you recognize that it's coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when we say that this is racial nisayon, means these people are the spitz example, as a spitz dugma of what these things are. Now, a dugma is like when a person wants to sell something, like the Gemara says, he gives a small piece of the wool to the lokeach to see what it is. And that's like a dugma, that's what it is. And he tells him what he wants to buy and how much he wants to buy of that thing. And he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to be Mamed 3 avos for Klal Yisrael. And the first one was Avram. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed an asayin and a dugma of what was going to come afterwards. And Hashem also is going to appoint trained Mashiachim, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef from Shevet Ephraim and Mashiach ben David from Shevet Yehuda. The Herod Gmason be Yeshua of David, and he showed the example, that spitz, that piece ki'ilu, kaviyachol, that the Meicher shows the lekech, that little piece of wool, and he says, I want this much, I want that much, this color, this size. So that was the dugma of Yeshua and David. That's why it says by these 3 people, Zikna and Yamim, that these are the Zkanim for the Yamim that are going to come afterwards. And we could explain this, what we spoke in Psuk Yud, that Klal Yisrael heard what Yeshua was saying, even though he didn't gather them together. Like they sort of heard it in their nefesh, they heard it they heard it without having him speak. And we could say that the same thing applies to the understanding of the pasuk of Kalisha Sheyamar Es Picha L'Chol Asher Tetzavenu Yumas. Meaning, what does it mean Kalisha Yamar Es Picha? What are we referring to when we're saying Es Picha? But the same way we said that you spoke to a few people before and all of Klal Yisrael heard you, so too, Kalisha, anybody who's going to stand up against you is going to die. And why is that? Because it's Ki'ilu, all the chiyus is going to be squeezed out of the person, but Shas, the person, is mamre, what Yeshua ben Nun is saying. Meaning that's why Yeshua was the one to be the dugma. Meaning because the Dibur, the Klal Yisrael understood this on their own, that this was they heard and they fully understood, just like we spoke by the Shaitrim in Pasuk Yod, that they heard exactly what Yeshua was saying, even though he never gathered them together. Meaning that's how strong the dugma was, that's how strong the Nisayon was, that Nisayon, not test, but the example was for how they had to listen, what it means to listen to a Rebbe, what it means to listen to the Nasi Yisrael, to listen to the Melech. So we mentioned before that the Bnei Saschar brings the Girs in the Gemara that Ein Lecha Kol Shevet Shlei Hemed Melech. But if you take a look in our Gemara, the Girs is Ein Lecha Kol Shevet V'Shevet M'Yisrael Shlei Hemed Mimenu Shofet. Rashi says, what does a Shofet mean? Moshiach es Yisrael, to save Klal Yisrael. Oisen Shahayu Mishamesh Yeshua V'Shmuel. All those that were the leaders of Klal Yisrael from when Yeshua died until Shmuel Hanavi. Shemashach Shaul the Melech, that Shmuel went to anoint Shaul to be the king. Yeshua me Ephraim. Yeshua came from Shevet Ephraim. I mean, Rashi is saying here that he was a Shofet. Ehud mi Binyamin. Ehud ben Ger was from Shevet Binyamin. Gidon was from Shevet Menashe. Harei mi Bnei Rachel. That's from the children of Rachel. Shimshon mi Dan. Baruch mi Kedesh was from Naphtali. That's from Bnei Bilha. Ivton was Boaz, was from Shevet Yehuda. Eli was from Shevet Levi. Toilo was from Shevet Yisachar. Elon Hazvuloni was from Zavulun. Elam Mefurashim. This is Rashi in Sukkah. This is very clear in the Psukim who they are and what they're about. Aval Asniel, V'Yiftach, V'Shamgar, V'Yor, V'Avdain, Le'Yadati Shema Shiftayan. These other Shoftim, Asniel, Yiftach, Shamgar, Yor, and Avadain, these 5, it's not clear what Shevet they were from. Ruvain, V'Shimon, Gad, V'Ashalem, Etzasim, Mefurish. Doesn't say clearly in the Psukim where these Shoftim were from, and also, being that the Gemara says that Ein Lecha Kol Shevet V'Shevet M'Yisrael Shlei Hemed Mimenu Shofet, so there are 4 Shvatim that's not clear who the Shoftim were from that Shevet. Now, if you continue in the Gemara over there, the Gemara says also Ein Lecha Kol Shevet V'Shevet M'Yisrael Shlei Yatzu Mimenu Neviim Shevet Yehuda Binyamin Hamidu Malachim Al Pi Neviim. But in our Gemara, we don't have the girsa that the Bnei Yissaschar has. But Hamidu Malachim al Pinavim. Maybe that's what the Bnei Yissaschar is coming from. But Avada, everything is going to be al Pinavi, as he spoke in the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, Parak Aleph Halacha Gimel. And Avada, there are many similarities between the din of a shofet and the din of a melech. And to continue along these lines, it's very clear that there are places in Chazal and the Rishonim that are Mesiachas to Yeshua as a shofet and not as a melech, as we saw from Rashi here, and as we spoke in the Netziv in the previous year. And there are places in Chazal that refer to Shaul HaMelech as being the first king, and no reference to Yeshua being the first king. Yeshua wasn't a king necessarily; he was a shofet, he was a leader. In Bamidbar Rabbah, in Parsha Yudalad, it says, "Ksheyaakov goes ashetahir rabonus leEphraim kayam HaKadosh Baruch Hu devara kemasber hanatua ve'omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu hoyel goes Yaakov al Ephraim sheyehi rishon afani asimenu rishon." It's talking about when Yaakov switched his hands to give the bracha to Ephraim and Menashe. See, he gave the Ephraim first. So Yaakov goes ashetahir rabonus leEphraim. When Yaakov was geyser that the Rabbonos, the leadership, should be given to Ephraim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was makayim his words, kemasmer hanatua, like a nailed-in peg. V'omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Hoyel v'goza Yaakov al Ephraim sheyehi rishon. Because Yaakov was geyser, Yaakov decreed on Ephraim that he should be the first one to give forth leadership. Afani asimenu rishon l'chol davar. So too I'm going to place him first for everything. Whether it's b'shoftim, u'b'dgalim, for the judges, and for the flags, b'malachim, and for the kings of b'kabanos. B'shoftim was Yehושע, shayeshevet l'matei Ephraim ha'shea benun. V'achakach Gideon ben Yoash u'mishevet Menashe. So first we have that Yeshua ben Nun is from Shevet, the Shofet from Shevet Ephraim. Then afterwards you have Gideon ben Yoash, that's from Shevet Menashe. So you see that Ephraim comes first. Menashe and when it comes to the kings, Yeravam ben Avatar, Mishal Ephraim. V'achakach Yehu ben Nimshi was Mishal Menashe. It's interesting. It's much interesting to see that we have. The Medrash says very clearly that Yeshua was a shofet, and that he was the first shofet as opposed to the other one who was a shofet later. And that. When the Gemara, so I'm jumping back and forth. It's not so in order over here. When the Gemara says that Ein l'chal kol shevet v'shevet miYisrael, meaning because Rashi over there, as we spoke in that Gemara, Rashi brings that the Yeshua has a din of a shofet, wasn't a melech. The Gemara says over there, Ein l'chal kol shevet v'shevet miYisrael shliyatzim mimenu neviim shevet Yehuda Benyamin Hamidu malachim al pi nevim. And Rashi says the malachim al pi nevim is Shaul v'David al pi Shmuel. Meaning, even if you want to say that Yeshua had a din like a king, but it's very clear from the way Rashi is setting up the sugi over here that he wasn't a melech, mitzvah same tasa melech a melech. Because that mitzvah, as we spoke yesterday from the Netziv, is really totally in the fact of after Yerusha Ha'aretz, after Yerusha and Yeshiva Ha'aretz. Like the pasuk says, Ki savay la'aretz asher sham lekach v'naisim lecha v'yirishta v'yeshavta ba v'amarta asim alay melech. It says that only after you come into Eretz Yisrael, the land that Hashem gave you, and you settled in it, and that's when you're going to say that you want a melech. And maybe we could say that Yeshua's malchus was something that was miyuchad, because Moshe Rabbeinu was mevakish yivkar Hashem alekei ruchas l'chabasar shaleid sheyetzel l'fneim sheyav l'fneim asher yitziyem asher yiviyem. And as we spoke yesterday from the Medrash, as we spoke in the previous year from the Medrash, that the malchus was she'ula b'yoda, was dafka b'shas milchama. And it was, it was set up this way, dafka, for this man of when they had to conquer Eretz Yisrael. And again, it's interesting. Some places we find that Yeshua has a shofet, klape. When we're in the context of comparing to Malchus Beis David, we say that Yeshua had a din of a shofet. But when it comes to, let's say, Malchus Ephraim, so then we'll refer to him more as a melech. Now, b'shas Maisa, b'shas Anahogas crossing over the Yarden, Melchemes Yisrael, and Yeshiva Aretz, Avada, he had dinei melech. But Klape the Malchus of Shaul and David, he was only a shofet. I think that's pretty clear.